Hi, general psychology students. The purpose of this video is to talk about human genetics, the first section of Chapter 3, Biopsychology. The thing about the chapter of biopsychology is that for some students, it is by far the easiest chapter in the whole course. These students tend to be students who have always been interested in the medical field. They've got a strong background in biology, and they've watched lots of YouTube videos and TED Talks about the human body and genetics and all kinds of things. If you have read if you've read Chapter 3, it's very clear. It's more of a review for you. You look at the study guide and you know the answers, then you don't need to watch these videos. There's another group of students, the majority of students who enroll in general psychology, who read this chapter and find this chapter to be the most difficult one in the textbook. I hate how it comes early because it can be discouraging to a student and they think, oh, I'm not going to do well in this class. So if you're in that group, hold on tight. I've made a bunch of videos for you. So if you feel overwhelmed by what's in the textbook, we're going to break it all down video after video. I've tried to keep them short so you won't get too bored or overwhelmed. But we're going to cover this material section by section. Hopefully you'll understand it. So I'm going to share the screen now so we can look at the PowerPoint slides. So remember that these PowerPoint slides are available in the course content material. If you go to course content on the left side of your Blackboard course shell, then choose the Unit 1 folder. And then if you scroll down, there'll be Unit 1 PowerPoint slides, and there'll be 4 links, one for each chapter. This is the 3rd link because it's Chapter 3. The first couple slides have to do with the theory of evolution, and most of you have already heard about theory of evolution. You know it really well. If you have any questions about it, feel free to email me and we can set up an appointment during my office hours or at another time that's convenient for you, and we can talk about it over the phone or have a Zoom meeting about it. But basically, the theory of evolution says that the genes that stay in our gene pool as a culture are the genes that people have who survive to have children, to reproduce and continue their genes. And so genes that are not very adaptive, those people who express those genes are less likely to have children, so the genes don't get carried on in the gene pool. And eventually those genes will go away. So the genes are there's constant mutations happening. Some of those mutations will help the person to survive to reproduction, and then those genes will stay in the gene pool. Some of the mutations will make it less likely for the person to reproduce, and those genes will go away because they won't stay in the gene pool since they're not carried through to the next generation. Okay, so let's get to the material on human genetics that I want you to know. So first of all, you need to know the difference between a genotype and a phenotype. So remember that in your genes, you're going to have your chromosomes, and you're getting half of your chromosomes from your mom and half of your chromosomes from your dad, right? So you're getting half of the information from your mom, half from your dad. Your genotype is the specific genetic material that you've inherited from your parents. The phenotype, however, is what you're going to end up looking like. So when we look at our genetic material, some of our genes are what we call recessive, meaning that you're going to carry this gene, but you're not going to have the phenotype of that gene. Other genes are dominant. And the dominant genes, if you have even one of them from either your mom or your father, then that's what your phenotype will be. That's what you'll look like. So when we look at dominant genes, most of the time, think dark, think big. Those tend to be the dominant genes. So the dominant eye color is brown. Freckles are more dominant than not having freckles. Dimples are dominant. Unattached hanging earlobes are dominant. Widow's peaks are dominant. Dark hair is more dominant than light hair or red hair. A cleft chin is dominant. So if you have even one of the dominant genes, then that is what you will look like. So if you even have one dominant gene for brown eyes, then you're going to have brown eyes, okay? So your genotype is what the genes you actually have. The phenotype is what you're going to look like, what we're going to be able to observe when we look at you. So one of the examples that they give in the book is the cleft chin, because the cleft chin is one of the few genes, few features that appears based on just on one gene. So in this example that your book gives you, the mother is obviously has the cleft chin. She's giving her child the dominant trait of she's got the dominant gene of a cleft chin, that's the capital B. And she also, however, is carrying the recessive gene of not having a cleft chin, the small b. So she looks, when you look at her, she's got the cleft chin, but she's carrying that recessive trait of not having the cleft chin, okay? She marries a man, though, who does not have a cleft chin. He's carrying both of the recessive traits, the small b and the small b. The only way that you can have a phenotype of a recessive trait is if you have both of the recessive genes. So when this mother marries this father, when they have the first child, the child has a 50% chance of being like the mom, inheriting the dominant gene from the mom and the recessive gene from the dad, or a 50% chance, I should say, and a 50% chance of inheriting the recessive gene from both parents, the small b and the small b from the mother and the small b from the dad. The mother can only give the child either the small b or here she's giving the child the small b, here she's giving the capital B, the dominant, the cleft chin. The father can only give the recessive trait because that's all that he has. Now these children, if this is your phenotype, you're going to be like the mom. You're going to have a cleft chin, but you're carrying that recessive trait. If the child looks like this, however, he's going to look like the dad, and he's not going to have the cleft chin. He's got the recessive trait, okay, the two recessive genes. So you can see here how the recessive and the dominant genes, then that's the genotype, affect the phenotype. Okay. This Punnett square is looking at PKU, and it's using capital N as the dominant trait, and then of not having PKU, and a small p as the recessive trait. In this case, both parents are carrying the recessive gene. Neither one has PKU, but you can see that one of their that 25% chance they're going to both give their child the dominant gene. And if their child's genotype looks like this, when that child marries, that child is unlikely to have a child with PKU, because all that person can give their child is the dominant trait of not having the PKU. There's a 50% chance that their child will be like they are, and they'll be carriers of this recessive trait. So they won't have PKU, but they could have a child with PKU. And there's a 25% chance that their child is going to get the recessive trait from the mother and the recessive trait from the father, and they're going to end up having the PKU phenotype. So because they're going to have both recessive genes. Okay. Now I don't want you to think that because it's a percentage that it always works out exactly like if they have 4 children, one will have it. So an example is in my family, I'm one of 6 children, and 2 of us have juvenile diabetes, type 1 diabetes, and there's a genetic component to type 1 diabetes. Neither of my parents have diabetes. So my parents, my mom and dad, must both have the dominant trait of not having diabetes with the recessive trait of having diabetes. And so I do not have diabetes. I don't know if my genotype is that I carry the recessive gene, or like this person would and this person would, or if I don't carry the recessive gene, that from both of my parents, I took the dominant gene, not having diabetes. Now we do know that both of my sisters that have diabetes, in order to have their phenotype be that way, they must have gotten both of the recessive genes from my parents. Now notice there's 2 of us 6 children, 2 of us have it. So that's more than 25%. It's all, for each child, it's going to be a probability. And given that neither of my children have it, I very well could have this genotype, but I don't know. I could have this genotype. Okay. So I hope that this makes sense. Now, nature and the genetics are going to play a role, but also the environment, or what we call nurture, is going to play a role. And both are going to play a role in our phenotype, in what happens to us. One thing that I want to talk about next, I don't have a slide for it, but it's in your textbook, has to do with twins. And twins are really important to us as we study psychology. And there are two different types of twins. We've got identical twins and fraternal twins. So identical twins could be renamed monozygotic twins. And we say this because what's going to happen with the identical twin is that when the ovaries release an egg and the sperm fertilizes the egg, and then the egg and the sperm go down in the fallopian, they're going down through the fallopian tubes, they keep dividing and dividing and dividing. If in one of those divisions they divide too much and become separate beings, and then they continue to divide and divide separately, we're going to create identical twins, or monozygotic twins. There was only one zygote that was created. So when that sperm and that egg got together and created the zygote, when the zygote was dividing, at one point it divided completely and then kept going, kept being created. But it was the same sperm and the same egg that led to both children. And so genetically, these two children are identical. If one of them is a small b, the other one's going to be small b, small b. Genetically, they're identical. Now, there's another kind of twin, and that's the fraternal twins. We can call fraternal twins dizygotic twins. So with a fraternal twin, or a dizygotic twin, what happened is there were two eggs that were released, and two different sperm went and fertilized two different eggs. And then both of those eggs, at somewhat close in time, went down the fallopian tube and into the uterus and attached to the uterine wall and then created. Now, dizygotic twins, there's two zygotes, there's two sperm, two eggs. They're no more similar to one another genetically than any other brother-sister or sister-sister or brother-brother combination. They just happen to share a womb, and then because they're born at the same time or within minutes of one another, they're going to be more similar in the environment that they grow up in. But they are not. They only share the same amount of genetic material as any other brother-sister or any other sister-sister or brother-brother combination, regular siblings. So can you have a fraternal twin where one's a boy and one's a girl? Yes, you totally can, because there's two different zygotes, dizygotic. Can you have an identical twin where one's a boy and one's a girl? No, because if you're an identical twin, there was one zygote, monozygotic, there was one sperm, one egg, and so with an identical twin, you share all of the genetic material. And so if one's an XX, the other one's an XX. XX is going to make you female, XY is going to make you male. And so they have to be you can't have identical twins that have different sexes. You can't have identical twins that are going to have different colored eyes. You can't have identical twins that have different dominant and recessive traits. They're going to have the same because they share all the same genetic material. Now, because they share the same genetic material, they are so interesting for us in psychology to study. They help us detangle this nature versus nurture thing going on. What of our behavior is due to our genetic makeup, and what of our behavior is due to the environment? Well, if we can look at monozygotic, those identical twins, and look to see if they tend to be more similar to one another in all different traits than regular siblings who are not identical, who are twins or even not twins, or people who are strangers, then that gives us a hint that thing is genetic, whatever that is. So identical twins, if one identical twin has schizophrenia, it's likely that more likely that the other identical twin will have schizophrenia, more likely than if it's just a regular brother-sister or two brothers or two sisters or two strangers. And so we now think, based on that information, we're like, ooh, schizophrenia has some kind of a genetic component to it. Same thing with depression, major depression. If one identical twin has it, the other identical twin is more likely to get it than a regular sibling, a non-identical sibling, or a stranger in the population. So we love to do twin studies. And in fact, in Ohio, there's a town called Twinsburg. And in Twinsburg, Ohio, they have a huge twins festival each year. It's a big deal. There's lots of researchers there with tents set up. And identical twins fly there from all over the country. And they give prizes to the twins who will participate in the different studies that are going on. And I've got a sister who's got a set of identical twins who just turned 16 recently. And it is amazing to see how similar they are in so many ways. It's hard to know how much of that similarity is due to similar environments and how much they influence one another and how much is due to their genetic makeup, but they certainly are fun to be with. I know when they were young, they shared their own little language. They had a language that they could communicate with one another with words and sounds that none of the rest of us understood. And they are so close, so much closer than most sisters that I see. So, and if you're an identical twin, it'll be interesting to see if you have the same or a similar situation when you're sharing the prompt about this on the discussion board. Perhaps you could give us give us information about that. Let us know what your experiences are as an identical twin. Okay, that ends this video on human genetics. In the next video, I'm going to talk about neurons and how neurons communicate with one another.